Hi, my name is Dr. Jennifer Green, and this is a video about the wonderful world of wordless books and how we can use them in our classrooms for language learning. And when I say language learning, it can be any language. It can be Arabic, English, Spanish, German, your choice. I'm a Fulbright Scholar at Al-Balqa Applied University and from Western Washington University in the United States. So, one of the great things you can do with wordless books is tell a story. And many of the wordless books are a really clear storyline. So one of them is Pancakes for Breakfast, and it tells the story of a woman who wakes up hungry and she wants to make breakfast, and it kind of goes through the process of gathering her ingredients, and then it turns out the cat and the dog destroyed her ingredients, so she goes to the neighbors to get her pancakes. So there's a little bit of humor, but it's a pretty simple story. Some other options are The Farmer and the Clown and Snowman, and they all tell these stories of interactions with other characters, and there's a sequence of events that are pretty easy to follow. Now, one way you can do it is by having teacher-generated language. So you, as the teacher, can model what's going on. This is great for students' listening skills, introducing new language, and stretching their language. So if I have beginning students, I might say something like, "Here is a house. It is winter. There is a lot of snow. There is a woman in bed. She is sleeping. There is a cat on the bed and a dog next to the bed." Now, if your students are beginning language learners, they will not understand all those words. But if I talk about the cat and the dog on this page, and the cat and the dog on this page, over time, they are going to learn the word for cat and dog. They might not know all the prepositional phrases on the bed, next to the bed, but I'm also pointing. Right? So they're hearing language, but there's this very clear picture that gives them context to help them make connections between the few words that they know and the words that they're going to be learning. More advanced students, obviously, you can speak faster, use more language. Oh, so Sophia, she was just really thinking about these delicious pancakes. She hadn't had pancakes for a long time. It had been maybe a month or 2 or 3. Oh, and she really wanted them. But first, she had to get ready. So she's washing her face here. And the cat and the dog are just wondering, what will she make us for breakfast? Do we also get pancakes? So you can make it more complicated. So teachers, you get to decide the language that your students need as you tell the story. But if you want your students to tell the story, that's also great. The best way to do this is to let them have time with the book. Begin by having them work with a small group, maybe a partner, maybe 3 or 4 other students in their group, and they can just go through page by page so they know the story. And then once they understand it, and maybe you've taught them some vocabulary, then they can practice telling the story. And they get to practice it several times before sharing out. You might have different groups be in charge of just a couple of the pages. Right? And then different groups go around and tell their part of the book. The great thing is you can really think about what your language goals are as they're telling the story. Maybe you want to work on prepositional phrases. Maybe that's what you're studying in your units, right? Maybe it's about adverbials like slowly, quickly, hungrily. Maybe it's verbs that talk about what the characters are doing or thinking. It could be practicing connectors of time, like next and then and before and after, right? So you can choose to have your students be free and just tell the story as they want, or you can say on each page, I want you to include a word of time sequence, or I want you to think about 3 verbs to tell what's happening. So you can be very, very focused in on particular language goals. So in another book that I have, Mr. Waffles, and what another thing you can do is, if it's a new book that students have not seen before, you can help them understand how storytelling works. Right? You can talk about the features of storytelling and how authors, when they write, they are very, very clear about introducing the who, the what, the where, the when. And so you can have students figure out, how do wordless book authors do the same thing? So if you look at the very first page, who is this story about? Who's in the story? Right? And how do they introduce it? Now, if you say, well, there's a cat, well, how do you know? Because you can't see an entire cat. You just see the back half of the cat, right? And so what does that make you think? How is this telling you about the cat? You know, the cat is walking past all of these toys. So what does that tell you about the personality of the cat, maybe, right? So there's these clues. So you're not just reading the story as a story, but you're thinking about it as an author. So that's another level that you can have with students, to really dig into those details that they notice. Another really cool feature about this book is when the focus is more on the cat, and perhaps the cat and the aliens, we have a white border. But anytime it is just focused on aliens and not the cat, the author puts a gray border around it. So you can see here it's dark and gray. Oh, it's gray. Gray again. There's a lot of gray going on. But then it turns white around the edge. Right? So those visual details. And then what does that look like then in writing? How might an author do that in writing the story? How would they help the reader move from character perspective to character perspective? So there's all these really basic levels of reading a wordless book, and there are higher levels of reading a wordless book, which is what makes it great for students of all language levels and all ages. So another thing that was kind of similar when I talked about the windows in a different video, is you can really think about, rather than the entire story, having students tell the entire story like in these two, you can also just take a single picture. So in Flotsam, it is a story about a child who finds a camera on the beach, develops the pictures, and then discovers pictures from under the sea of fish and whales and other marine life living very differently from what we think. So for example, there's this picture here of, you can see there's a spaceship, there's aliens, there's some seahorses here, and there's an alien riding a fish, there's a child poking at an eel, a child alien, right? So they're doing some like human-like things, but they're under the sea and the seahorses are just staring at them. So you can give students pages from this book. Maybe each group is in charge of one of the scenes of this one or this one, and they have to tell a story about it. So with university students here, that's what I did, is I told the first third of the book about the boy finding the camera and getting it developed. Then I said, and here are the pictures. And we passed the pictures out, and small groups had to describe the picture and maybe tell some characters, a little event of what happened. And then I finished the story about what happened after that. And it really brought the story together. Groups were in charge of one picture, which is sometimes more manageable if you have a short amount of time, or your students get overwhelmed by all of the words that they might have to know to talk about an entire book, right? So they're very focused. And it was really fun because for me as a teacher, I did this in, 10 different groups of students. And every time, students told a slightly different story. They noticed different details. They focused on different aspects. And that's what's beautiful about these books, is it's never the same story twice. So what else can you do with wordless books? Well, you could have students make their own. And they could do that by drawing, taking photographs, cutting pictures out from magazines. And it could be something more like a process, like making a meal, or feeding their animals, or walking around and introducing people to different personalities or cats, or playing soccer. Or they could make a fantasy, more like having aliens or that sort of thing. And then they can give that version to a classmate who has to write or tell the story. And it's really interesting because the author probably had one vision of where it was going, but a classmate might have something else. Because again, authors invite the reader into the storytelling. So some important things to think about: know your students. Figure out what they're interested in. Consider your context, how much time you might have, how you can use these to add to the curriculum that you already have to cover, but you can do it in a way that supports that learning. Be creative, and your students are so creative. They will help you with this. Balance your voices, let your students do some of the reading, but you should also do some reading of these books to model what it can look like. Welcome and support multiple languages. It is okay when students are trying to navigate the story they want to tell in English if they're using a little Arabic. And find ways to think about how to support all forms of literacy. So this has been a focus on oral language, but students can write. Then they can read each other's writings, right? So you can practice listening, speaking, reading, and writing with wordless books and have fun. What are some other ways you might use wordless books to benefit your students' language learning? Thank you.